reminders, if you have friends or colleagues who will not be able to join us today, let them know that all sessions will be live streamed on our Facebook pages, National Book Development Board page, and Philippine International Literary Festival Facebook page. Also, don't forget to share your photos, videos, and other takeaways by using hashtag PILF2019 or hashtag PILF2019. Also, we have coffee on the side. So if you want to have coffee, just go there. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Morning. So welcome to our Philippine International Literary Festival Day 2. Can we have applause? Okay, so our session for today, our first session is Citizen Writer, How Words Can Change the World. Stories define not only who we are as individuals, but also what our nation can be. This is why freedom of expression is considered a human right and why censorship is wielded by authoritarians, because having a voice is having a vote in our future. Dr. Miguel Syjuco, writer and professor, shares his ideas on how stories can empower us and how we can all refuse to be silenced. Our speaker for today, Dr. Miguel Syjuco, is an assistant professor of practice, literature, and creative writing at New York University, Abu Dhabi, a contributing opinion writer for the International New York Times. He is a member of the Academy, the Folio Prize, and serves on the Advisory Council of the Resilience Fund, a project by the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime to build resilience in communities threatened by criminal abuse of power. His debut novel, Illustrado, has been translated into more than a dozen languages and was a New York Times Notable Book of 2010, and was the winner of the Man Asia Literary Prize and the Palanca Award Grand Prize, among other prizes. Working in journalism for 20 years as a sub-editor and freelancer, his writing has appeared in the world's most reputable publications. Dr. Cejuko has a master's degree from Columbia University, a PhD from the University of Adelaide, and was a Radcliffe Fellow at Harvard University. His fiction and nonfiction focus on politics, history, inequality, cultural identity, literature, and formal experimentation. Let's all welcome Dr. Miguel Syjuco.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Good morning, everybody. I can't believe you're actually here at 9 a.m. I can't believe I'm actually here at 9 a.m. So first, let me thank you for coming. Today, I just want to have a conversation, really, with you. And I invite you, in fact, I expect you to please have a conversation with me as well. Because that's what literature is. Literature is a conversation. You know? When you read Rizal, you're conversing with him and his ideas about what it was like back then, what he hoped the country could become. And when you sit down to write, say, for example, something like speculative fiction, you are conversing with the future, you are conversing with yourself, you are conversing with your contemporaries about how you see the future, what you hope it will be, what the human condition will turn out to be at that later date. So literature, to me at least, and I think most everybody would agree, but I attempt to challenge you to have this conversation through literature, and I'd like that conversation to start today. So yeah, I'm going to be not calling on people, but I hope you will participate as well. I know, I thought about this. I thought, okay, should I go and have some sort of speech, and then have some sort of Q&A at the end, as one does sometimes at events like this? But I don't know, I'm less interested in hearing my own thoughts, and I'm more interested in what we together can be doing as writers and readers and people who are deeply engaged in Philippine literature and also concerned about what's going on in our country. So, let's start with a question. And it's a question that I have always asked myself throughout my career. You know, as a writer, I was always obsessed with this idea of how do I become a writer? How do I get published? What will my career look like? How do I earn a living? This is what I always thought. But after I published my book and answered all of those questions of how, I began to start asking myself, why? Why am I a writer? What is the good? What good is a writer? So I'd like to put that question out there to anybody here. What good is a writer to society? Yeah.
Sir, I'll try. He can be an influencer. I mean, he influenced others to, I may say, do good things, influence them to become inspired, to dream, I may say, to dream what you become, or to dream something of an idea of sight, or something that can change ideas to other people.
Yeah. So again, engaging in the conversation with other people. You can influence people to start, well, hopefully not just buy your stuff, right? Or follow you on Instagram, or support your blog. Well, you can also influence this idea of, let's think this through. Let's see the other side, right? Let's understand this issue as very nuanced, you know, and not super oversimplified. You're right. You're absolutely right. You can become an influencer. What else? What else can a writer do? What good is a writer to society? Because, you know, this is what my parents always told me when I was growing up and wanting to be a writer. You know, why don't you just become a lawyer, be a doctor, be something useful? What good is writing?
Writing immortalizes your thoughts so that even if you're long gone, you can still leave a part of you behind.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So here we're seeing a pattern already, no? We're seeing that you can influence your contemporaries, but at the same time you can converse with history. You can leave something behind. We talked yesterday at our opening meetings that memory, remembering, writing things down is an incredibly important thing for things like identity, for understanding who we can be, for example. Okay, so there is some good in being a writer, although, you know, my parents were always very skeptical, until I got published. And then my dad said, I'm so proud of you, it's all because of my support. Success has many fathers, including your own. So we can have some sort of influence, some sort of impact as writers. And this is why we do this. It's not definitely for the money. It's certainly not for the fame. But although if you can get those things, then good for you. Tell me how. Sorry?
No, I mean, you can influence and you create an impact that presumes you're widely circulated, you're widely read, right?
Well, that's the thing, right? The bigger soapbox you have, the more readers you have, the more impact you possibly can have, right? And so that's why you work very hard in your career. You go out there, you freelance, sometimes you'll write things for free. You'll take on any assignment. You'll write as many books and short stories as you possibly can. You try to get yourself out there. Nowadays, it's a little bit easier now with social media, right? We now have access that we didn't have access before. But okay, so it's possible that we writers can do something good in the world. But what is the good that we can do? What are some of the specific things? I would bet anything. I would bet my life on the fact that every single one of you in this room thinks that there are problems here in the world that need to be fixed, right? This is not a perfect world, obviously. What are some of the problems that need to be fixed?
I'm thinking of education and how teachers should not teach just using textbooks, but literature.
Yes.
So that I think is so overlooked, the value of literature for young children, for healing, for recognizing the beauty of language. So as a learning tool, I think it's so essential.
Yes, ma'am. So, education, understanding literature, using it to its most effective possible role or purpose. What else? What are the other things you need to be fixed? Karina said, don't get us started. I mean, I'll start you off. Climate change is one thing, right? Gender inequality is another thing. Economic inequality is another one. What else? Just shout it out. You're all angry about it. What else? Killings. Bad governance. Corruption. Ano pa? Traffic. Okay, yeah, exactly. Historical revisionism. We could go on. We could spend a whole hour and a half going through this, but that's not, it would be fun, and we'd come out feeling a little bit better in some ways, but even angrier. That's not what this morning is about. So we have a whole list of things that needs fixing, obviously. We said that writers have a role in society. So how then can we writers, and readers by extension, we'll talk a little bit later about how we are all writers, or how we are all potential writers, and why we are writers, potential writers, because the truth is we're all readers. But anyway, we'll get to that later. So, how can we fix some of those problems as writers? See, now here comes the tough part. My dad pala was right. Well, the writers can't. How do we fix pollution? How do we fix climate change? How do we fix traffic? What good can we do?
Well, I come from a generation where we already confronted issues like this at a certain period, in the 70s and 80s. My concern now is the modes of this protest discourse. It seems like it's not going to be marches or rallies. And people seem to be able to vent on social media. Their anger dissipates. So my question always is, how do we do this? Writers are supposed to influence people, awaken people to be able to go bodily, protest, march in the streets. No, but that's not happening now. What happens is the social media is the platform, the anger dissipates, and that's it. They're able to vent as quickly as possible, which we didn't have in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, that's funny, no? We have this incredible tool to be able to publish ourselves, to disseminate our ideas, to converse, to critique, and yet somehow it creates this bubble, it creates a circle, it doesn't come out, we vent a little bit, and then it doesn't come out in real actual change. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but so what other things can we writers do? We have these very sharp pens. We have a certain amount of access to that grand conversation, right? We can tell our stories, which are about the human condition. We can report, we can bear witness. We can go out and investigate. So what are some of the skills then that we need to do if we want to be able to address some of these problems that we shouted out? Yes, ma'am.
Be able to discern fake news, or we should be able to go to trusted sources.
Yeah, okay. So we need to be able to discern fake news, go to trusted sources of information, or even be able to participate in being those trusted sources of information. That's one thing, perhaps. I have no answers, by the way. I should start this off in the, as a disclaimer, I should have probably said this earlier. I don't have the answers. I have a lot of questions, and I'm hoping that together, all of us here, we're all literary, bookish types, right? When pressed at a meal, we think we act like we know things. We have the answers. When you're stuck in traffic with the taxi driver and he's talking about the politics that you disagree with, you've got the answers, right? So let's try that this morning. Okay, so we need to be able to be engaged or somehow demanding of reputable sources of facts, something that we can rely on. What else? What are the other skills that, as writers, because we're all writers, whether you're published or whether you're just posting on social media, we're all writers. We are all engaged in writing. What are some of the other skills that we might be able to use?
Maybe probably more on empathy because our aim as writers is really to persuade, and without persuading people, without knowing where our audiences are coming from, where they are coming from, their ideas are coming from, we cannot really persuade them to listen to our position or our ideas. So I think it's more of a challenge for us to really listen before we start speaking because, for example, while we want to counter this prevailing narrative of authoritarianism and whatnot, but what we need to really get into is what is their narrative and what are we trying to offer an alternative narrative that's not just going against their narrative, but an alternative narrative that is better than what they are really espousing. So I think more of the conversation is, I think more the people around us, while we are trying to persuade them, I think they're more of fence-sitters. So I think there is still more time to persuade. So that's what I think.
Absolutely. Thank you. And learning how to be persuasive is another thing. So it creates a whole list of skills that we have to learn how to do, right? Such as one of the things I teach is how to write opinion pieces to my students. I tell them that, sure, you can publish something on a blog or on the internet, on social media, but if you're able to access the methods for mass dissemination that already exist, publications, newspapers, if you're able to write a very persuasive essay, which is an opinion piece, 1,000 words, makes one point and makes it very well, and then gives some sort of recommendation for how we can move forward, then you can access any newspaper anywhere if you are able to have that tool in your writer's toolkit, if you can write opinion. If you can be empathetic, for example, on social media, right? I made the mistake one time on social media. It was late at night, I was hungry, I was tired, I'd been attacked a lot for the things that I say on social media. And somebody goaded me. They said, "Oh, you're just jealous of Mocha Uson. Because she's more famous than you." I thought, wow, you're really comparing, apples with suha, And I got pick on. I got super pick on. And I said something like, yeah, well, she's a passing fancy or something like that. She's a flash in the pan. Sure, she's got all these followers now, but I'm published in these countries, and I got angry. So I got my yabang. Published, I've been translated in 16 languages. My work will outlive her. Because it's true. It will. We're writers, we put things on the shelves. After the great bombs have gone off, and the Mocha Uson blog has faded from the internet because we no longer have any more power, and the zombies are taking over, our books will still be in the library. So, okay, I got picked on. And somebody took what I said in the message boards. It was deep in the message boards, the comments boards. Took it, turned it into a meme. Got an awkward picture of me, although I think it's a pretty good picture. Put a princess tiara on me. And every time people who dislike me want to attack me, that meme comes out. And it's as if the conversation is finished because they made a meme of me, right? And it's my fault. I should not have gotten picked on. I should not have been able to give them the ammunition to cut down my attempts to persuade them, right? I got pick on. That's one skill I need to learn how to do, right? Pick on talo. Persuasion. Learning how to write in methods that persuade. Opinion pieces. Academia, for example. Academic papers. That's also very lasting. How to also write for social media. Right? How to use humor. Even how to make memes, for example. These are all some of the many tools we can start to learn how to do to be part of that conversation. What are some of the other things you think you should learn, you want to learn as a citizen and a writer that you want to work on to become more effective. Anything else?
Persuasion, haven't they changed for this new audience? Do we have
The skills of persuasion, have they changed for this new audience? That's a good question. I don't know. I actually think that the fundamentals are still there. Yeah, there will always be, okay, with my course in NYU Abu Dhabi called Citizen, Writer, I set out to create a curriculum that was meant to empower young students to be able to participate in this conversation that we're talking about. And it was inspired by those Parkland students in Florida, in the US. So these young kids, they were in school one day, about to take their exams, and a gunman comes in, shoots, I don't know how many people died there. Dozens of students, teachers, staff. And these young students, they said, well, enough is enough. Almost every day we have a school shooting or some sort of shooting in America. We have to push our leaders to take action on this. And so what did the students do? The students went and started speaking in public. They went and started writing opinion pieces. They went and appeared on CNN and Fox News to be interviewed. And that's scary. If anyone's ever been interviewed on news and they say, okay, you've got a 30-second segment, and we're going to be interviewing and asking you 5 questions in 30 seconds. You get taranta, you know, it's really hard. I've done this before. I've been on TV for whatever interviews, and you get scared. And then you always think, oh, I should have said that afterwards. You know, after they've taken off the mic and you've left, think, should have made that good point. Right? So these are skills that these students needed to have. They needed to be able to speak publicly. They needed to be able to defend themselves off from attacks, because that's what happened. These young teenagers, really, who were so woke, they're woke, is the word apparently that they use. They wanted to participate, and everybody started saying, oh, they're crisis actors. Oh, they're professionals. They're not really teenage students. Or, oh, they're being funded by George Soros and the Democrats, or all of that sort of stuff. And these were kids with a legitimate, valid issue. They're friends. They saw their friends gunned down. And they said, they wanted to say enough is enough. But the grown-ups said, okay, shut up. What you're saying is invalid. You're immature. What was it that Duterte's, was it Panelo, called the young students who wanted to protest? Temperamental brats. Yeah, exactly. But since time immemorial, that's what's happened, right? Us oldies were telling the kids, you have no right to say what you're saying. But that's not true. The thing is, I actually believe that they have more right than we do, because we screwed things up already. We've had our time. It's their future that they want to be engaged in. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna create this course, and I'm going to teach my students at NYU from across the disciplines. It's part of the core curriculum. So I have everything from engineers to computer scientists to writers to biologists and policy students. I wanted to teach them the skills that they might need to be able to participate. And so what we do is we look at things. We start off with, actually I start off with a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Do you know this story? If you don't, you should look it up. It's available on the internet. The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. And I don't want to give away too much, but it's about this incredible, wonderful city, society. Everything works. Everybody gets along. But somewhere in the dungeon, there is something terrible happening. And that terrible thing is what allows this wonderful society of Omelas to exist and thrive. And there are people who that does not sit well with them. And they are the ones who walk away from Omelas. They're not willing to take that compromise. So we start with that, this question of what is our role? What will we bear in our society? And then I go on to Claudia Rankine's Citizen, which is a really great, I wouldn't call it a collection, Basta, she's a poet, and it's a book called Citizen. And it's about, especially the African-American experience, but what it is to be a citizen in the United States. We get started thinking about citizenship, but then what happens is then we look at some of the skills. We look at rhetoric. We look at rhetoric from the time of the Greeks. We look at fallacies. Daming fallacies sa internet, no? So that we can spot how these fallacies work in our own thinking, and we can also critique them or address them when we see them being wielded against us. I think that's as old as time. Whether you are in the Greek forum trying to say why you shouldn't be killed by hemlock, right? Or whether you're online fighting the trolls who make memes about you, that's one skill. It's as old as time. We also look at oration. I ask my students to choose a great poem from history and prepare to deliver it. And a lot of these students, they're afraid. I mean, I don't blame them to stand up and to orate. Especially now, we all hide behind our phones. We don't pick up the phone anymore and call people. You know, there's a filter now. So I get them standing up. And then I have them write manifestos. We look at manifestos from history. 150 years of manifestos, starting with the Communist Manifesto, ending with the Apple Manifesto. It's very interesting, actually. If you study manifestos, manifestos were, the first they were very political. Then they were artistic as a way of addressing the politics. And then they became more commercial, and then they were put on mugs, and they were put on bags. And Lululemon, for example, the yoga brand, very famously has a manifesto. So, but we look at manifestos and how they have aged throughout time. And then I ask the students to write their own manifestos. I write my own manifesto every year. It's my manifesto for what I'm going to be doing. So it's a skill that I want to give them as well. So being able to declare, being able to speak out, you know, these are ancient things still. But we have to be able to tailor them now, I think, for the new tools. Every single despot or regime will try to hijack the new technology and use it to their advantage. The Nazis, Hitler's chief propagandist, Joseph Goebbels, he came across radio. He decided, I'm going to use radio to unite the Germans against the Jews, or scare them about the Jews, and unite them against the world. It was radio, brand new. What he did, his masterstroke, was he consolidated all of the radio stations and took them over. And that was the way that they got mass media. Nowadays, oh, and then you have the US with Hollywood, right? Hollywood is the biggest propaganda tool ever, right? You think about Independence Day. You know the movie Independence Day. Aliens have come, and who saves us from the aliens but the American fighter pilots? You know, we're leading a coalition of the world to fly up the poet, basically, of the big mothership and blow it up. America, you know? And nowadays, we have different forms of propaganda. The internet, unfortunately. We've seen how that's been hijacked. Not only has it been hijacked by people who have money to create troll farms, it's also been hijacked by the social media platforms themselves. It's been hijacked by certain countries that want to influence the elections of others. So how do we fight against that, right? And I think some of these tools that we have, old tools, ancient tools, are still applicable, I think. But I don't know, I'm always scratching my head about how can I be, as a citizen, as a writer, how can I be more effective? What else can we do? What else can we learn? What are you working on your own to make yourself more effective? You're just trying to get published still? I mean, that's valid, absolutely. That's one step in your career as a writer. But surely you're also working on other things. Writing for the news, I think that's super important as well. No, number one, it'll help you become a freelancer and pay for this very fanciful writing career that your parents warned you about. Maybe making blogs. Are any of you here bloggers? Yeah? Okay. And it's hard work, right? It's very disciplined work. You're a citizen journalist, and you're publishing yourself. Instagram, does anybody have a very tailored Instagram thing where or is it all just cat videos and food porn? Do you have like Instagram projects? For example, there's this one called Eva Stories. Really interesting Instagram feed. What it is basically is a 2-hour-long film, for all intents and purposes, told over the short Instagram stories of 30 seconds each. And it imagines what life was like in 1930s Germany when the Nazis were coming to take over. And it tells the story of a young woman named Eva, who's she's an Instagrammer. So she's Instagramming, her boyfriend, meeting her boyfriend in the park, but then he's wearing the Star of David. She's Instagramming her street, but then the Germans drive in and start breaking the windows. So, they're using Instagram as a really effective way to look at history and to warn that this is what would happen again. So, there are all sorts of things that you could be working on, different projects that you can be working on. So there are certain tools, but the question is do we still believe that even with these tools, writing can change the world? If I told my dad that when I was going to college and I said, I want to take up English literature and become a writer, he would probably have said, you really think it's going to change the world? You think it's good for anything? And I ask myself that all the time still. Can it change the world? Yes? No? Yes? Says the writers. Okay, why yes? Anyone from the back? Why can writing change the world? Writing can change minds. Yes?
Yeah, it can change minds.
Yes?
And once minds are changed, people start doing things they used not to do.
Yeah.
They start thinking differently. They start looking at things differently. They start digging up things which they used to not see. So they'll probably discover a tyrant where there wasn't, obviously, before. So changing minds, I think, is the fundamental function of writing what you read.
Thank you, Marnie. Yeah, okay. Can change the world by changing minds first. We're both writers. How are we doing in that department? Yeah, that's right.
Yes, with regards to changing minds, it can also inspire a revolutionary action. Like Jose Rizal with Uncle Tom's Cabin. He read that and he was inspired to write Noli Me Tangere. That's the best example, I think.
That's absolutely right. Exactly. They can change minds, and then they can change people into collective action. The other course that I teach at NYU Abu Dhabi is a course called Novels That Changed the World. And it looks at those very few novels, those works of fiction, that actually have had real social change. And the Nolly is one of the books on our curriculum. We start with Uncle Tom's Cabin. We go through the Nolly. We look at The Jungle, which is about workers' rights in the United States in the early 1900s. We look at Chinua Achebe, which was the first, with Things Fall Apart, the first book that really helped give some sort of solid identity and tell the side of the Africans as opposed to the colonialists. And we look at, what else do we look at? We go all the way up to the Satanic Verses, which is actually banned in the UAE, but I'm very lucky because we have full academic freedom in NYU. And what's interesting is that when it comes time to report, because the students have to choose a novel, and they pair up and then they report on this, it's always the Muslim kids, the Arab kids, who say, oh, I want to take it, I want to take it, I want to try. Sometimes some of them are very scared of the Satanic Verses. They say, oh, I heard it's going to offend me. And I say, well, have you read it? And they say, no, I haven't read it, but my parents told me this. And I say, do you follow everything your parents say, or do you always question? And they say, yeah, we always kind of question what they say. So why don't you read it and then make up your mind, and if you hate it, you can throw it away, you can disregard it, but at least open your mind and see that. So we go through all of these different books. We look at Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer, right, and how that was important in changing legislation about what can and can't be said, freedom of expression, what is art versus what is smut or pornography. So we look at how other writers have actually changed things in their own way. Sometimes they do it deliberately. Rizal really had a very deliberate goal in mind. Upton Sinclair, when he wrote The Jungle, which is about workers in Chicago working in the meatpacking industry. Terrible thing, terrible industry at the time, early 1900s. These workers were working in inhuman, terribly inhuman conditions. But what happened is people read this and they saw, oh wow, the meatpacking industry is dirty and the meat is contaminated. And the change that came out of this book wasn't that workers were suddenly given more rights. It was that the Food and Drug Administration was put together by Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, and food standards were implemented. And so Upton Sinclair famously said, I tried to hit readers in the heart, but I got them in the stomach. There was change, but it was unintended change. Salman Rushdie probably did not intend for the satanic verses to send him into hiding for how many years, have friends and family threatened, have friends killed, bombings, all of that. He did want to push the conversation a little bit, but I don't think he intended the result to be this. But the point is that it is possible for fiction to actually change things. It's very interesting because when I was making the course syllabus, I could think of so many different nonfiction books that have changed the world. We start with scripture, for example. Although some of you will say it's nonfiction, there are people, although some of you will say it's fiction, there are people who really believe it's nonfiction, and we'll give them that. So we start with scripture, and you go all the way through the different histories. You know, Euclid's Elements, for example, is another one that absolutely changed things. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, another book about environmentalism. You know, we could go on and on and on and on about nonfiction that changed the world because it's armed with facts, and that's why it changed things. But fiction, though, is different, right? Fiction somehow, when I was making a list, I could think of all these books that changed literature, but I couldn't really think of a lot of books that actually changed society, that had real social impact, launched revolutions like Rizal, changed public policy, changed colonial policy, you know, moved people into the streets. And as a fiction writer myself, I thought, gosh, so why am I doing this if it's so hard, if it's so difficult? I mean, okay, Uncle Tom's Cabin, right, helped mobilize people against slavery, so much so that Abraham Lincoln came and when he met Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author, and said, so you're the little lady who started this great war. And it's, to a certain extent, that's what happened. People started reading about the lives of these slaves and got into the heads of these characters and started to feel for them. I mean, fiction does that very well. There's a really interesting historian named Lynn Hunt, American, I think, out of California. And she has a book called Inventing Human Rights. And she has this very interesting proposition. She says that in the 1700s, when we started seeing things like human rights being put into constitutions, when there was the Declaration of Independence, when there was the French Revolution, this was also the time that people started for the first time reading novels. There were books like Pamela, for example, by a British author whose name I forget. People were reading Zola, and the people were reading for the very first time the interiority of people that they had nothing in common with. And it was a very profound thing for them. I mean, the print had become more mass-produced. People were reading. Finally, education had come up. And so finally, novels had started changing minds because it forced people to exist within the heads and the hearts and the being, the situation of all of these characters. And that was a paradigm shift, according to this historian. It was also the time that painting went from religious painting and painting of martial scenes, you know, great battles and portraits of aristocrats. It went to painters going out and painting just regular people, merchants, people on the streets, you know, stevedores in the ports. That became the thing. So people could finally go to these galleries or see themselves, see regular people, and look at themselves as if in a mirror for the first time. And it was around this time that people started asking for more rights, saying that torture is not a right, that we are given inalienable human rights, universal human rights. It's a very interesting premise. I don't know if she proves it very well. I invite you to look at this book, Inventing Human Rights. But as a writer, to me, this gave me hope. I thought, okay, well, it's true. I do believe that writing creates empathy. I do believe that it brings us together. It is the connective tissue. It allows us to see each other somehow. And it's interesting to see how the evolution of writing, novel writing, fiction, the way we see ourselves, does parallel how things are placed in policy, in law, in our constitutions, all these things that we take for granted today. You know, we forget that there once was a time, not too long ago, just a few hundred years, when it was an absolute monarchy. And the king and his family and the aristocrats could do anything they wanted. They ran over you with a carriage. There's nothing you could do. You had no right. That's what the world was like. And maybe it's a little bit similar here, still in the Philippines. You know, there's absolute impunity in many ways. I do believe we live in many ways, in all ways. I believe we live in a dictatorship of dynasties. 80% of our legislature is run by dynasties, and I think that it's taken away our right as citizens, as individuals, to say, hey, you know what? I've got some good ideas. I've got community support, and I have integrity. I'm going to go throw my hat into the ring, and I'm going to run. Absolutely impossible for any of us, unless you're an actor, boxer, super well-connected, diba? I mean, Marnie, you're a very famous author. Can you run for president? I don't know. It's kind of scary, you know? There's not much that we writers can do. I think I'm a pretty good writer, but there's no way I can win. So basically, the mechanisms of governance it's not accessible to us, and yet we're supposed to have it. We're supposed to be able to run, right? For barangay tanod first, right? And you can if you want, but you know the kind of world you're getting into. You can become a congressperson, right? And you can work your way up but I don't know. I don't think any of us here would probably do that because we know it's rigged. It's absolutely rigged. But it's in our constitution that we should be able to. Sorry? Danton Remoto. Yeah, he hasn't found the success he deserves, I think. Yeah. Although maybe that will change as writers become more appreciated thanks to the NBDB. So, but then, okay, if we were to talk about these books that changed the world, they're very few. But what about the books that changed your lives? That's easy, right? Everybody's nodding. What are some of the books that changed your life? The Little Prince. Ano pa? The Alchemist. No? What else? Come on, you're all nodding. What was the book?
So just Art of War, but applying as much possible to yourself. Like in debating in Facebook. And then,
Yeah, Sun Tzu's Art of War. In fact, it's so successful, there's so many spin-offs, right? Sun Tzu's Art of Dating. Oh, that you have that. Does it work? What else? What are some of the other books?
The Unfinished Tales of by J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah, the tragedy, the love story between Beren and Luthien really struck me. So it's a very sad story, and sad stories really make me, empathize.
Of course, because we're all emotional Filipinos. We love to cry. You're right, absolutely. Okay, so these are some books that changed you personally, right? What else? Any other books that changed your life? Nobody has books that have changed your life. Yeah. Sorry? State of War. How did that change your life? Ninochka would be so happy to hear that.
Sorry. Well, just made me politically aware.
Okay.
Because it's more on issues of political dynasty and stuff. And I think it's a good insight in Philippine politics in general.
Yeah. Ninochka Rosca's State of War. Yes, sir. Comics. Yeah, that's right. Which ones? Which comics kaya? Ano pa?
God of Small Things.
God of Small Things. Why did that change your life?
Because it showed something, the basic need for intimacy and love, and they can't have it because they are too different. So it's like, it's the first, I read it when I was 12, and I realized that the world is not fair. It's not.
Yeah. No, it's definitely not. Okay, so we've got a few things. Comics, I absolutely agree with also. I agree with all of these. These are great books. They changed you personally. So what does that say then about words? If somebody can sit down in front of a typewriter, a computer, a laptop, a pen and a paper, and change you, what does it say about the power of words? Yeah.
Perhaps if we personally had some sort of change when we read something, it basically affirms that what we are feeling, what we are thinking, are perhaps similar to that of others. So it allows you to see that you're not alone with your struggles, you're not alone with your thoughts, with your feelings. So it's basically like, aside from affirming you, perhaps it also reinforces the fact that we are all human beings, having shared memories, having shared histories, and all that.
What else? How else does it? I agree with it 100%. How else does it change you? Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to start calling on people. I'm just joking. Anyone here from this side? Favorite books? No? Sige.
It's not a book actually. It's a story. When I was I printed on a textbook when I was in high school. So it is entitled Lumang Kotse by Ikat. So
Yeah.
I was so moved by that story, and when I started to share the lesson that I've learned from it from my friends, they also feel the same. So I think that's a very powerful story that until now, I am still embracing the lesson that I've learned from it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with me. I think you've hit on something here that I was hoping we'd get to. This idea that you would share it with friends. Right? So we take books, we share it with friends, and we start talking about it. Right? I guess you start thinking, wow, that was really good. And then you start talking about the characters. And what happens? You're connected now suddenly with your friends. Right? Somebody sat down, made something up, put words down onto a piece of paper, and somehow started to create the sense of community, I guess, coming together, this conversation. And all of these things are incredibly important, right? We talk about that a lot. Okay, so words can somehow change individual lives. We've seen how they can change socially somehow. Maybe that's a little bit harder to achieve. But what I find really fascinating and hopeful is that words are democratic. They're available to everyone. We all have them. Sometimes it's a problem, but I think that's a really great thing, that we are all empowered with it. The problem, I think, is that not everybody has the ability to share them as widely. And so someone like Rogelio Sicat wrote beautifully, wrote very profoundly, and that was what got his work disseminated. Other people write for big, major newspapers. You think of Manila Times columnists, for example, right? They've got a huge soapbox. They don't have the artistry of Rogelio Sicat, but somehow they've got something, probably personal connections. But anyway, there are things that get you out there somehow. And that's one of the things that I think as writers we need to start thinking about. How do we sharpen that? Do we use beauty? Right? Do we use the ability to move people? Do we use the ubiquitous discipline of being a blogger that people start to trust? Do we use facts? You know, like the people at Rappler, who I believe are absolutely heroes, you know, they're sticking to facts. Do you use social media, for example, to talk about real issues that people get upset about, and rightly so, and that demand change for? So words are absolutely democratic, and they're more democratic now than ever. The problem is that the systems of power have made it so that some voices are louder than others. Some voices are more influential than others. And that's why you notice the first thing that a despot, a dictator, wants to do when she or he starts to take power is what? Shut you up, right? Silence you, censor you. And it used to be that during the time of Marcos, for example, the government would go and take over the radio stations, the television stations, the newspapers. Now you don't have to do that. Now all you need to do is drown out all the dissenting voices. That's why you don't have people going to sequester these media. Maybe in certain countries like Venezuela, but even in places like Russia, there is this free media. Here in the Philippines, there is a free media. But what happens is that they're discredited, right? They're attacked, and they're overwhelmed by trolls, by well-funded operations to rewrite things and basically control your history, control you, control who we are. So they are essentially democratic, but in practice, they've become a little bit hijacked. Now, I believe that as a writer, oh no, not even just as a writer, I believe that for all of us, to have a voice is to have a vote. That's essentially it, right? We're all supposed to be given a vote, and we all come together in the elections. But also, metaphorically speaking, and quite literally speaking, if you have a voice, you can speak out. You can say, this is the candidate that I want. These are the issues that I believe are really most important. This is the corruption that I believe needs to be addressed, and this is something that needs to be punished. If you can speak out, you have a vote in the future of your community, your country, your society. The problem is, those voices are often not as powerful as the other ones. That's the problem. So the question I have is, how do we make it so that every voice is more equal, so that we are more heard? For example, I did some pieces in some of the slum areas of Manila during the first months of the drug war. And I went into a community in Paco, and I first started asking, does anybody have any family who was, victimized during the EJKs or during Tokhang? And somebody said, oh, you go talk to somebody over there, and they'll tell you. So I went over across the street, and then I knocked, and they came and started telling their story. And I thought when I first went, I thought they would be afraid to tell me their stories. But no, they were so enthusiastic. And then what happened was that first it was me and this family, or one person, and then the family came out, big family. And then suddenly the whole street came, and I was surrounded by 20 people saying, oh, and this happened to us, and this happened to my brother, oh, and his bayao got killed. Everybody wanted to tell their story. And it struck me because it's like, okay, well, I'm writing an opinion piece for the New York Times. I don't know how far this is going to go, but the fact of the matter is that they weren't afraid. They wanted their story heard. I saw in what they were doing as this really hopeful gesture of, we don't have a voice. You, Kid from Makati, you seem to have a voice. We're going to tell you our story. Maybe you can help us have it heard. Right? So I'm convinced that there is this great inequality in how voices are presented. And we're given this illusion that, okay, you do actually have a voice. Every 6 years, every 3 years, you can go and you can vote and everything's going to be okay. And then you shut up, and in between, if you trust us, we're going to make the country better. But, just vote, you have your say, your one say. And we saw in the last election that wasn't always the case. You voice your vote, you put it through the machine, and something else would come out, right? This happens in lots of elections all around the world. This is an issue. But essentially, we're supposed to be able to have that facility, to be able to voice our vote for who our leader will be. I believe here in the Philippines, we don't really have leaders so much as rulers. We're ruled, we're not led. And because there's no way to get rid of them. It's very difficult to get rid of them. The only way to get rid of a bad leader or ruler is to put in somebody else who's also not that good either, right? And so we put on Game of Thrones, right? We're just kind of waiting for one house to take over the other house, and hopefully that house is going to be less barbaric than the other house, right? There's nothing we can do. So I'm interested in, as a writer and as a teacher, of how we can make sure that those voices, our voices, are heard. But is it enough for it to be heard? What do you think? On the internet, where you can go and find a newspaper article, and you can comment, right? You can put your blogs up. You can go on social media and you can attack somebody and make memes about them, right? We have all of these hundreds of wonderful ways to participate and speak. It's no longer before. There's a newspaper and you had letters to the editor, and that was the only way to be heard, right? But what more do we need then? Where is the limitation kaya? What do you think?
Does it not seem that, okay, this content is prevalent, people are relatively well informed, but it seems we need an incident, like a shooting at the airport again, for us to get together? I thought that the election result perhaps would gather people, but no.
Yeah, well, even if there is a shooting, for example, in the airport, will that change things now? There was a shooting in Caloocan of a young boy who was going to go home to take his, to study for his tests, and you know what happened there? A lot of these things aren't happening anymore, and people speak out, but nothing really changes. You know, I'm not being pro or anti anything. I just want us to all be able to participate. And for me, what's really scary is that our governments and successive governments have refined this way to really just shut us up. You know, for example, here in the Philippines, libel is criminalized, right? So you can be put in jail for writing a true story about a certain political figure. They can bring you to court. They'll put you in a court. They'll file a case in the court in their district, for example, their congressman. So you, as the journalist, have to fly there, face the judge, who's probably in cahoots or paid by the congressman, right? And very possibly be put in jail for writing that true story that you wrote about that politician. It's a story that deserved writing. So it's become weaponized, right? We see how even our law has become weaponized. And then they say, okay, well, we're going to fix this. We're going to do criminal libel law. Soto did this a few years ago, right? What did he do? He made it so that it's 12 years instead of 6 years. He didn't just address the idea that the libel is criminalized. He upped the ante and said, okay, well, you can be put in jail for libel for 6 years, but if you do it online, if you do it on social media, you can be put in jail for 12 years. So how do we fight stuff like that, though? That's my question. What do we need to do to address this? Scary, no? Like, I don't know what to do. We feel powerless. You've never felt more powerless in your entire life? Yeah. So during martial law, you had a common cause, right? Is it so much that we need a common cause now, or is it, I don't know, what can we do? I'm scared. I'm scared especially for my students. I'm scared for my daughter. I'm scared for the next generation. Because what do we do? What can we do? Do we just wait for the next person who says, I'm going to come in and I'm going to fix this and I'm going to empower you, and just wait? Is that all we have? We're writers. We're supposed to be influencers. We're supposed to have the responsibility and access to tools. We can get published. We can get published in national newspapers or international newspapers. And yet somehow it's still not enough. And it feels hopeless But I imagine it felt just as hopeless to someone like Rizal when he sat down to write The Nolly and the Fili. Or Harriet Beecher Stowe when she saw that half her country was engaged in the enslavement of human beings. And yet she went and she sat down and she wrote a book. I don't know if they thought that they would have the effect and influence, but somehow they did. So history teaches us that it is possible. But why does it still feel so impossible today? So we go and protest, we go into the streets, we fill the whole front area of Rizal Shrine, you know, or we come every year to the EDSA Shrine, or we march in the streets in Mindanao when, you know, when indigenous peoples are being victimized. But what happens? It takes time. Well, it took the Spanish, 350 years? But what I find interesting about the Illustrados, when you look at them, when you study them, so it was like 1860, all of us were speaking our own vernacular languages in our region. I think it was 1860 something, 1862, the Queen of Spain decreed that Spanish start to be taught to us Indios. And it gave us a lingua franca, it gave us a common thing. So we had people coming from all over the different islands starting to study under Spanish, going to Spain. And in 30 years, things changed. Very interesting. Language, a common language, a shared language, an ability to communicate with each other. And even the Illustrados, for example, they knew the potential of the press. They went and they did the propaganda movement in Spain. They had La Solidaridad, right? So, I don't know, I don't think much has changed there. Our method of dissemination has, perhaps. And that's, I think, one of the things that I'm trying to figure out. I haven't figured it out. I'm trying to learn this. But one of the things that I tell my students is that instead of learning to be something, which is what my parents always said, what are you going to be when you grow up? You've heard all this, right? I'm sure everybody here, your titos and titas, your parents, at some point said, what are you going to be when you grow up? And you say, okay, I'm going to be a writer. And they say, okay, don't do that. Or, I'm going to be a journalist. And say, okay, puede, but you know, that's dangerous and you're a girl. Don't do that. Or they say, you know, I'm going to be a lawyer. And they'll say, okay, great, I'm proud of you. Good, I'll support that. What if instead of asking our children, what do you want to be when you grow up? You start with one of the questions I started with. What is the problem that you want to fix? And this is what I tell my freshman students. What is the problem that you want to fix? And they'll say, climate change, gender inequality, you know, poverty, intolerance. And I say, okay, well, if that's a problem that you want to fix, what is the major that will teach you the skills to be able to fix it? Okay, well, I'm going to go study public policy, or I'm going to study gender relations, I'm going to study this. Okay, cool. Well, you're going to study that. And then what are the internships that you're going to take? I'm going to take an internship at this NGO, or I'm going to take an internship here with this community leader. And then they graduate. And then they go and take a master's degree, perhaps, in something that they actually believe in something that they feel they can actually use. And it's pretty amazing. I've been teaching for 4 years now, so I've seen my first batch of freshmen graduate. And it's really exciting to see where they're going, because they're going to be taking these master's degrees. They're going to be working in these companies or working for these organizations that they actually believe in, that they actually feel that they can come to as an organization, as an organized group of people, and work for to create change. So this is what I always say, you know, what are the problems that you want to fix? But I think also, even if you're not a freshman and you are actually a writer, what are the problems that you feel with your writing you can address? I have friends, for example, who just cover environmentalism. I've tried through my opinion pieces to look at all the different aspects of what's going on in governance, from corruption to dynasties to criminal justice reform to the drug war. I'm trying to look at things in a very purposeful way as a writer. Now, it sounds like I'm just talking about politics, but if having a voice is having a vote, then what about poetry, right? What about our wonderful fiction about a boy and a girl breaking up? What about speculative fiction or science fiction? What's the point of that? That's probably what my dad had an issue with, right? Where are you going to go with that? You're going to be a Hemingway? Where's that going to get you? But I believe, at least from my own career and from the careers of a lot of people, you look at someone like Nick Joaquin, for example, Jose Rizal, every single thing that you write is practice for the thing that you want to write later on, for that really important declaration, for that really subversive piece, that book that's going to change things. Everything you write, every post, every poem, every bit of juvenilia that you write as a teenager and are ashamed of later on, that's all practice for the writer that you're going to become. Nothing is ever lost. So if you are learning how to be a poet, you learn how to wield the line. You learn how to make things beautiful. You learn how to be economical in your writing. You know how to use metaphor. You know how to use rhyme and rhythm. If you're writing short fiction, you're learning how to use narrative. You're learning how to build characters, create empathy. You're learning how to connect with people that way. You're learning how to tell a story that people want to listen to. And that's super important one day when you decide, I'm going to write this expose. I'm going to write these essays. One of my favorite writers here in the Philippines is Patricia Evangelista. Do you know her? For Rappler, right? She writes these incredible reports about what's happening in the drug war, for example. But she's like Dickens. She's really like Charles Dickens. She writes about the humanity, about the characters. She writes like a novelist. And I'm convinced that it's all because she read a lot of literature. And it all helped her practice her voice, that voice again. Helped her practice that voice so that it was stronger and more effective. So I believe everything you write is part of that practice. Now, some of us are writers, some of us are aspiring writers, some of us are readers who say, oh, I could never write a thing. It's so scary, it's so hard. I don't know how you do it. It's true, it's scary, it's hard. I don't know why I do it, honestly, sometimes. But what's funny to me is that even though we say that, we have been researching story our entire lives. We think it's so difficult because when we go and we look at Rizal, when we go and we look at our favorite authors, and we compare our work to theirs, we think, oh wow, how do we even get to that level? My first draft, it's terrible. Oh, I'm going to give up. But then we forget that what's on the shelf, what's been published, what's been awarded, is part of a very long process of development. Practicing for years, writing that first draft, writing that second draft, showing it to your first readers to give you criticism, maybe creating a workshop where everybody talks about how to fix that work, sending it to your agent or your editor, somebody who'll give you feedback and say, okay, well, this is too long or it's not sellable. I don't think readers will like this. Going back and forth in this process of revision, constant editing, self-editing, revision. And that's how we go from here for a crappy first draft to this very finished, polished draft that makes us so insecure and says, oh, I'm going to give up. The fact of the matter is that you have been steeped in storytelling since before you could even speak, right? Your parents were reading you stories when you were just a toddler, right? You're surrounded by stories, movies, songs, cuento, jokes, myth, legends, scripture. It's what connects us, honestly, stories. And we're so, I think, surrounded by it that sometimes we forget that we need to study how that works, how a story works, what the mechanism is, how to build that engine that it is, right? And I think those of you who are studying creative writing, those of you who are engaged as writers, you're trying to understand how this machinery works so that you can build a better machine than the next one. And if you build a better machine, then more people will read it. And if more people read it, what happens? They start talking about it. They start creating a sense of community. They start maybe conversing and saying, hey, we need to change things. So when you think of Harriet Beecher Stowe, she sat down, she wrote a book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Did the book itself change the world? What changed the world? The effects. The readers changed the world. The readers read this. They said, this is not acceptable. Let's organize the abolition movement. Let's press our congresspersons, our senators to push for laws. Let's protest in the streets. Let's not give up because this is so important. So it's the readers, not the writers, who changed the world. It's the readers who were moved by the writing that changed that. And I find that so incredibly promising, honestly. So very hopeful, in a way. The fact of the matter is that we are all potential writers because we're all readers. And if we can just get over ourselves and maybe put Facebook and Instagram aside a little bit and really start working on our stuff and being unafraid of being edited, joining workshops, writing and writing and writing and writing. The only way, I teach creative writing for a living, but I believe the only way to actually, I can teach you how to read critically, I can teach you how to workshop in a healthy environment, but I can't teach you to write. The only one who can teach you to write is you. And the only way you can learn that is through writing. See how that works? It's a funny thing. You can go to school for it. You can go take an expensive master's degree like I was lucky to take. But the truth is, I learned more about writing working in newspapers when I was unemployed after my expensive master's degree. And I was forced to actually learn how to write to a certain length, learn how to write to a brief, learn how to consider my audience, learn how to make my words short. I learned more from working in a newspaper than I ever did in my 2 years taking a creative writing master's. And it was because I wrote. So that's my advice. As a citizen who wants to use your words, write. Make sure you know that nothing you ever write is ever lost, ever wasted. But one of the things I also want us to think about as writers, as readers, is our sense of citizenship. We are told that we are followers, following influencers. We are told that we are voters following whichever dynastic trouble seems less bad that we can get behind. It's always like a terrible choice. You kind of have to hold your nose when you vote, right? Sometimes you'll believe in somebody, but ultimately if you live long enough, they'll all let you down. I'm 42 years old. I've been let down by so many presidents. But when I was younger, I said, okay, I'm gonna rally in the streets for Gloria because, Arap is so terrible. He's so corrupt. I believe in Gloria. She was Bill Clinton's classmate. She's rich. She doesn't need to steal. I was very disillusioned. Let me put it that way. This is one of the reasons why, although I'm a very vocal critic of Mr. Duterte, I have never called anyone a Dutertard. I have never put anyone down for their vote, even though I very strongly disagree with some of their reasonings and the policy of this administration. Because I believe that in the end, I'm sorry to say, the way Gloria disillusioned me, this president, the next president, future presidents will all disillusion us somehow. Perhaps heartbreakingly so. And my obsession, I guess, is to learn how to help others participate, speak out, find their voices so that they can have that vote. But this is one thing that I absolutely believe with all my soul, is that despite what the world tells us, we are all actually leaders. You think, wow, but I feel so hopeless. How can I possibly be a leader? And then you go home, and you have to discipline your children, and you have to go to work the next day and run your business. And then there's some problems in the streets in your community. So you have to join the community association meeting. That's leadership. Absolutely. And the thing is, we're so obsessed with this celebrity politics and with this messianic syndrome of we will elect one person who will fix everything for us. I don't believe that's the case. I am not interested at all personally so much. I mean, I'll engage in it, but national politics for me is not where it's at. I think it has to be seeing ourselves as potential leaders, because we are. We're leaders of our families. As parents, for example, you're leaders of your organization. You're leaders of your band. You're leaders of your church group. You're leaders of your community. You don't have to enter politics or become a congressman. You could if you wanted to. But the fact of the matter is that if we start seeing ourselves as that, then I don't know, maybe somehow we can start changing things somehow. Because what you're doing is actually you're using words to connect people, like these books that we talked about. You're organizing around common causes, like Rogelio's Chicat did. We're making sure that people are talking about the important things, like all of these different newspapers, nonfiction books, fiction books that we talked about. Right? You're engaged actively in trying to change things by communicating, by discussing, and by refusing to be silent. So, I'm a Conyo kid from Makati. Hello, it's written all over me. This is what I was born into. I'm sorry. I'm a writer. How? It's not useful. People always attack me on social media and say, oh, why don't you run for politics and do some real change? But I have these tools. I have my privilege. I have my perspective. And I'm obsessed with learning how to be better at it, how to contribute more with it, how to teach others to be able to do the same thing. You're a poet. What am I going to do? Am I just going to go off into the mountain and write these beautiful poems and hope that people will read it and that it will grow up? Well, no. You know how to use words. You know how to understand the human condition, right? You're concerned as a citizen. You can be a poet and a citizen. You can go write opinion pieces. You can go do investigative journalism. You can go listen to people in the communities and help them have their voices heard. Not speak for them, but instead empower them somehow with your skills as a writer to be able to do that. And it doesn't have to be, I'm going to give up everything and I'm going to go and give up my entire life and live in the communities. I think you can do it through little ways. I'd like to think that the students I'm teaching is my own investment in this. I'd like to think that my being able to look beyond my own background and start to listen to people and start to talk to people and say, hey, look, I want to help. Tell me how I can help you. I'd like to think that that's my investment. And I think each and every one of you have those opportunities to do that in your own way as well, using the skills that you have. And so that's to me what citizen, writer is. Using writing to be a better citizen and using citizenship to be a more purposeful, effective, less selfish, and honestly better writer. But this is just my theory. I don't know if I'll ever prove myself through my own career. I'm trying. But I'm betting that somebody here in this room, somebody in the classrooms that I teach, somebody in the communities that I go and I try to work with will actually prove me right. And maybe we just need a few of those people to kind of give us the inspiration or the hope that sometimes we feel we don't have. So that's just, go prove me right, please. Are there any questions about anything? Yes.
Well, let me introduce myself. I'm Ruby. I'm a librarian. And I wasn't always a librarian. I was a virtual assistant for freelance and an information analyst. But I decided to become a librarian because I wanted to contribute to a better world, to become a better citizen. And I think that writers, especially those who want their work immortalized, should support libraries more. Because libraries are places where your work will be kept and pushed to readers, but but you don't get anything in return. It's free. So they're there, people can read them, but they don't pay you. They don't buy the book. But still, I think it's a way for writers to give a piece of themselves to the world by supporting libraries and librarians.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for your service, Ruby. Question is, how do we do that then, right? We write our congressperson. We put up our own library. You approach the rich people who might be able to give some sort of thing to create libraries in your communities. Absolutely. One of the things that I often think about also is, we go off into the streets to fight the drug war, hoping that somebody will fix it, stop tokhang, create accountability. Maybe what we're doing is wrong. Maybe we shouldn't be going to the streets just against that. Maybe we should be doing something smaller, something more tangible. We talked about making books be something available. Maybe supporting libraries is the way to do it. In the same way that maybe demanding body cameras on police officers is the one step towards fixing the drug war. Instead of thinking, okay, we're going to protest, and then somebody's going to say, okay, I'm going to stop the drug war, let's have these little steps. Body cameras on everybody. You have congressmen who will get on board that. They'll think, okay, that's fine. And in the end, suddenly we've got a means for accountability. Suddenly we've got a way to monitor. We've got transparency. So we talk about getting books into everybody's hands. Supporting libraries is the first step to do that. See, there are ways, I think, small ways, even in these huge, big problems. Is there anybody else that wants to add anything?
I'd like to second Miss Ruby's call. I am a classroom teacher. It's not really a problem, but more of a challenge. I'd like to say that Ma'am Nenny's comment a while ago about teachers not using textbooks for literature is actually a challenge. And I would have to agree with that because, for one, the pressure on my end being a literature teacher is I have to consume as much reading as I can. But I cannot always bring it to the classroom because of the technical constraints. Like, we are required to make use of the textbook, exhaust it, because the children and their parents actually paid for it. Now, in order to second Ms. Ruby's call, this is my point. How can writers, I know that most writers write for out of the passion that they have and all that, but it is also true that you write for economic purposes also. Like, some writers have it as their living. Now, my concern is about copyright. By experience, it's very difficult really, especially for Filipino writers, Filipino teachers, to access texts because of copyright purposes. They don't land on textbooks because writers themselves or the families of writers charge so much, to be honest, so much that I understand that there's economics behind it, but really the problem is no matter how much teachers would talk about Filipino writers here and there, our access is very limited, to be honest. And what we can do is, yes, we photocopy your works, but of course it's limited to using it in the classroom. But how about the teachers? I teach in Silang Cavite. And Silang Cavite is not even a very far province. But how much more are the teachers in more, farther provinces, finding it difficult to access literary works by Philippine authors, all because of copyright concerns? Yes.
That's a great question. I don't have the answer. Honestly, the person who's probably best equipped to it are some of the people in the room, but also you, as that teacher who has this problem. I guess what I've been trying to say is that there is a link that I have theorized goes from us as writers to being change makers. And it goes from thoughts, we have these ideas, to words that we write down. Words move people into action, into organization. You organize, you start pressuring people to make this change, things to address these demands. When you put pressure on the powerful, on our rulers, on the people who actually have ability to implement things that need to be implemented, because they'll never do it out of the goodness of their heart. This is just politics 101. Nobody will ever do something just because it's the right thing to do. If they do the right thing, it's also because it will advance their career or whatever, their integrity, their legacy, or whatever. I may be very cynical, but if we think of it this way, if we push for consequences by organizing, then we have change. And then with that change, we force these people to have some sort of responsibility, take responsibility for these issues. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. But I love that you're asking the question, and I hope that somehow someone here can help you with that, help you organize, and help you address it. Yeah. See, so that's the thing. I'm not here to tell you that I have the answers. I don't at all. That's why I said this in the very beginning. You all do. You all do. And I think it starts from asking these questions. I'm not an expert on any of this. You are. You're the expert in the things that piss you off. Because when something really pisses you off, you think about it a lot, right? Think, okay, this is how I should fix traffic, right? I think the answers come from people who are most involved in it. The question is how do you put yourself in that chain that will create, from your thoughts and ideas, words into the action. Anyone else have anything else to add? Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, in my opinion. In a media-driven society that we have today, the journalists, the literature, are the maker of the leader. And so if we are the maker of the leader, we can cross them out. That's make President Duterte outstanding because he's not affiliated with those media or the current media outfits. And that's make us underdog. Those issue or this issue that we have today is just a sundry items. I believe, or in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, the Filipino today is trapped in the marketplace of ideas, belief, political principle, and some, with them, they don't have side anymore. They become neutral. But with this neutrality, we need to choose our side, our core. Within the system, in the internal struggle of the Filipino people, we have many issues. And outside, we have big issues that we need to choose to side with. This is, in my own experience, I have a split personality. In gender, in principle, in religious, and potentials. There is an old in me that in conflict with my new in me. My old in me said, I need to be dignified, obeying the old rules and the meritocracy. The new in me wanted, I need to protest. I need to assert my right. But I choose to be neutral. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I agree, absolutely. Embrace that and see where it'll go. See where it'll lead you and how it'll empower you. More power to you. Anyone else have anything? Yeah? I think it might be the last.
Hello, I'm Najib Ahed. I work for a media information company. I think what he said was individualism. In the novel The Sympathizer by Bethan Nguyen, it was about a man who went from becoming a partisan to the individual. And I think the challenge of writers are how to affect people who choose to be the individual. Because they don't engage in politics, how can a writer affect those people?
I think by writing the book you wish existed, by making sure you have the voice, by developing that voice so that you can put forward those ideas.
Yeah, because I think nowadays most people are choosing to be the individual, and the writers, they perceive to be intellectuals, elitists. How can they mobilize those people who chose to be silent?
By writing really good stories, I think, honestly, in any form, whether it's memes, blogs, social media, novels, poems, policy, legislature. We're writing a narrative, and I think you find your voice to be able to be most effective in that narrative that you wish it to be. I really believe that we're engaged in these big narratives, and we're seeing this. We're seeing it through historical revisionism. We're seeing it through the justification of violence. We're seeing it through how people are marginalized. And maybe it's just because I'm a writer, but I really believe that having an effective narrative and being part of an effective narrative is where we create that movement and essentially create that sort of mass support and change.
Yeah, okay.
I remember you used to engage Duterte supporters on social media, and then at some point I stopped seeing those posts. So I just want to know what happened afterwards and what your advice you can give to us, because normally I don't want to do that, but I admire how you were so patient with them in answering. So, and then, what advice can you give us?
So yeah, I used to be, thank you. I think this is our last question and my last statement. I used to be very engaged on social media because I believed that was where the narrative was, where we had conflicting narratives and I had to help man the ramparts. I had to fight fiction and propaganda with facts. I had to reason with people. And I did it in a way that was deliberately kind, I think. I would engage people. I would hear them out. And I would also let them attack me. I was a huge punching bag because I felt, well, they're showing their brutality and ugliness. And I believe in turn the other cheek, right? I was raised a Christian, turn the other cheek. But then I realized, okay, well, this is getting nowhere. For me, at least. This is killing my writing. And I decided, okay, well, I'm not going to engage this. I'm going to try something else. This isn't working for me. So I started developing this model for conversation within communities, for civic conversation. And I paired with a friend of mine who's a big Duterte supporter. And she and I used to fight a lot on social media. But in the end, when we hung out, we realized, she had fought during martial law. We have so much in common. We actually like each other when we're offline. And we decided to put together this thing that we're calling Usapang Atin, where it's a model that eventually, when we do launch it, you can download and you can have these conversations about not politics, but about civics, about responsibility, about citizenship. And it's all about empowering the community through that. So I decided, okay, I'm not going to waste my time on social media anymore. I'm going to try to work within the communities. I'm also working with this NGO based in Geneva, Switzerland, which helps build community resilience against abuses of power by supporting actors and organizations in communities that are doing that. So we're supporting some of them already in the Philippines that are helping rehabilitation efforts, for example, that are helping draft drug policy, that sort of thing. So I figured, okay, instead of banging my head against the wall on social media, I'm going to try these other things any way I can, using whatever skills I have as a writer, as a professor, trying anything. But I also had to pull away because I'm trying to finish my novel. So sometimes you do need to pull away, be neutral, be away, go off into the mountains, do something so that you can create that work that actually lasts longer than the Mocha Uson blog, longer than your last work, longer than you, really. So that's why I've stopped writing also my journalism for the past year. I was very active in that. Not a pro or anti thing. It was just about these are the problems and these are the things that need to be fixed and these are the people in the communities that I've talked to and this is what I'm hearing and I think you should hear them too. That's what I was doing with my journalism. But I stopped that because I'm trying to write my novel. And sometimes I think that's just kind of what we need to do. We just need to work on being the best writer that we possibly can. And yeah, that's, I think, the best part to end here. Be the best writers that you possibly can. Because I think in the end, if you really think about why you're writing instead of how to write. Why am I a writer? What am I trying to do? Is it give beauty? Is it elicit change? Is it entertain? Is it create humor so that people are, that life is that much more worth living? Work on that. Find that purpose as writers. And that essentially makes you, I think, a better citizen, better human being, and honestly, a whole lot more hopeful, more able, and I think just happier. So go write those books. Go write everything, please. Be readers, have conversations. I don't have the answers. Disagree with me, take me to task, push me. Let's push each other, but let's please never stop listening and talking to each other. Because the truth is, there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. And sometimes our rulers try to make it so that we believe otherwise. And we have to fight that. We have to make sure that that never happens. Thank you very much for listening to me this morning. Thank you very much for speaking out, especially. Sharing your stories, your questions. And thank you very much for coming so early in the morning. And thank you very much to the NBDB. And more power to all of you. Thank you.
Okay po. So, thank you, Dr. Miguel. So, that was the session on Citizen Writer, How Words Can Change